Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Bates Botanical Boot Camp. We've got another one. We're starting this up. We're starting to get into the slow season here at the nursery, so we can do these for you, and we love doing them. We get to nerd out and just talk about things we like to talk about. Today, we're talking about underused trees. Now, this is a very big topic for me because there's a lot of trees that we sell here at the nursery that a lot of people don't even know exist. So we wanted to bring those to light and let you see those and know that you can come out here and buy one at any time. And they're just plants you don't think about or may not even know about. So that's why I'm here, and we're going to get going. We have a joke around here at the nursery. It's like, if we only sold dogwoods, redbuds, and maples, we'd still be doing fine. And that's true. That's what most people know. The dogwoods are extremely showy. Redbuds are showy. Cherry trees are extremely popular. Maple trees are very popular in the fall for their fall color. And I get all this. And why do we love those trees? Well, because of their ornamental purpose. I mean, they really, really showy plants. Okay, so dogwoods, redbuds, and cherries, the three reasons these are so popular is because they bloom before they leaf out. So they're covered in flowers before they're ever covered in leaves. So they're very, very showy. I get it. They're very, very popular. We sell the full out of them. But there's so many other trees that can be used in the same kind of way as that we use those other trees, but they're just different. They're those ones that people come to your yard and say, what is that? I've never seen that tree. They're good, talking points, interesting factors, say bark or interesting leaves or interesting flowers that you don't notice until they're, say, in bloom or in their fall color, whatever. So those are the ones we're going to be talking about today. I will let you know I did a little bit of writing some stuff down yesterday, to kind of get my bearings, and I used Durr's manual, D-I-R-R. Michael Durr is his name, and he is a professor at the University of Georgia, and he wrote Durr's Manual of Woody Landscape Shrubs and Trees. It's kind of our Bible, if you will, when it comes to woody landscape plants, and this involves trees. And so I referenced him a little bit. He's a cool guy, got a lot of good information about trees out there. It's a great textbook to have. Pretty much every nursery that you go to would probably have one on site as a good reference guide. So I used some of his information as well in this, so I wanted to give him a shout out because he's got great information. So here we go. We're going to talk about some weird trees. I got 9 that I decided to talk about today. So, you know what? Let's just get started. Tyler's over here directing this show, and he's got pictures that he's going to throw up for y'all to see. I don't have anything in the studio today because the trees are fairly large that I'm talking about. So, the pictures will have to do. So, anyway, here we go. Look at that. That is called the Carolina Silverbell. Okay? Halesia is the genus. And it's a nice, small-ish growing tree. It's about, at maturity, it'll get about 30 to 40 feet tall, which is fairly small for a tree. You don't usually see them that big. They are common, not common. No, none of these plants are common. It's a good plant to use in a fairly small location, okay? This can be used instead of a dogwood, okay? It's got small, white, bell-shaped flowers that occur either before the tree leaves out or at about the same time as when the tree leaves out. So you do get a good show of that white before you see the green leaves, but it happens simultaneously typically. The leaves and the blooms will happen for the most part at the same time. But look at that. Those little pendulous white dainty blooms with that yellow inside that holds the reproductive parts of the flower. And look, it's loaded up with those blooms. It gets to be about to where it's almost, I don't know, roughly half the size with the width compared to the height. So you can expect about 20 foot wide. And this is at maturity. This is not the fastest growing plant on earth. It's fairly slow, actually. Slow to moderate. I'll give it that. But look, I mean, my God, you just don't even know what you got until you got it. The leaves aren't, all that impressive. It's just a very, it's a simple alternate leafed plant. Can actually handle some shade around here too. It's actually a plant that can handle being close to that wood line or say fairly close to your home, to where the home maybe is casting some shade on it or some other large shade trees around, it's totally fine with that. And it will bloom every year without a problem. Really, really pretty underused tree. It's one great thing about this tree is that it is extremely pest and pathogen resistant. Like to nothing wants to get on this tree. I mean, you might see some aphids here or there or something like that, but for the most part, it's got no major pest issues. Just a good, sturdy little tree that not a lot of people know about. It is native to our woods here, and funny enough, the champion of trees means the biggest ones in nature that's been observed. The biggest Carolina silverbell has been observed in the Great Smoky National Park at, 104 feet tall by 40 feet wide. 104 feet tall. Okay, so this is how you achieve this. When you have a plant that's in the full sun, it's going to stay a little bit tighter, and it's actually going to stay a little bit smaller for the most part of its life. But when you get it in the woods and it has to compete with other trees and it has to reach for sunlight, you can expect a much, much larger tree. 104 feet on this plant in the Great Smoky National Park. So cool. That's just cool. I mean, when you're talking about a tree that typically is only about 30 to 40 feet tall out in your landscape, but then you can find a 104 feet tall one that's been observed, like, that's really cool to me. So
imagine finding that in bloom too.
Oh my God, could you imagine? Now, I will say too, whenever you put it in the shade and it's competing with the other trees, the blooms are much more sporadic. Okay, this is the same with like a dogwood. A dogwood can grow in the shade just fine, and dogwoods get very tall in the woods. But whenever they bloom, their blooms are very sporadic, and it's not near as as tight, so you don't get that full show. But you're right, Tyler. I mean, if you saw a 104 footer in bloom, my God, that'd be great.
Yeah.
So, like I said, really, really pretty little tree, mainly grown for its blooms in the springtime for sure. Not great with fall color. It can give you a little bit of yellowish fall color, but not really grown for that. So, like I said, nice replacement for dogwood if you want that kind of smallish tree out in the yard, in the front yard, just a little specimen tree, or even close to your home, that can be used. There you go, Carolina silverbell. All right, moving on. Number 2, we have the Kentucky coffee tree.
Hold on.
There, hey, where are we at? There we go. There it is. There's another one. Okay, so Kentucky coffee tree. Gymnocladus is the genus of this plant. And it's got compound leaves. So I'm going to mention this probably a few times during this, is that I'm a sucker for compound leaves plants. So there's simple leaves and then there's compound leaves. And compound leaves have leaflets that are attached to this long stem, if you will. And it's got leaflets that are off of that stem. So it, right off the rip, is fairly interesting with just its leaf shape alone. It's bipinnately compound, which is even cooler, that it's got little leaflets off of other stems that are off that main stem. So it's kind of hard to explain, but I'm into that. That's just, first off, very cool that it's got the leaf shape of that. And hence the name coffee tree. You can see those little pods there that turn that brownish, that kind of somewhat resemble the seeds of a coffee plant once you break those open. So like I said, those are its seeds that'll be inside those pods. Kentucky coffee tree is a large growing tree, okay? It's one that a lot of people recommend and should be used in, say, parks or golf courses or even in urban areas. It is just a very large growing shade tree that has these compound leaves. You can expect 60 to 75 feet tall out of this plant. Not extremely fast to get there. Another kind of somewhat slowish growing plant. It can get to be 40 to 50 feet wide as well. So a great shade tree if you have a very large area, but you do need a large area. It's a very large growing tree. One thing that Michael Durr wrote in his book about this plant is that it's got this irregular shape, and there's no two trees that are alike. So whenever they're young, especially, they can be a little bit funky, a little bit branchy in odd ways, if you will. And then they kind of grow out of that, and they grow into just this very large tree. One good thing that they do show, and one reason to grow it, is for that fall color. The fall color, it kind of depends. It really depends on the year, but there's a nice picture of it.
Sorry.
Yeah, we'll go. Yeah, real quick, we'll go back to its fall color, and every year can be a little bit different, especially in Middle Tennessee. And just to go ahead and say where we're at, I am in Middle Tennessee right now. We're in zone 7, so these trees are ones that grow well here. So just so you know, if you're watching from out of the state or whatever, this is the ones that can really thrive here. But it really has the yellow to orange fall color on good years. So that's one, reason to grow it. It's got no serious pest issues either. None to speak of really that are all that bad. So that's nice. You don't have to worry about that. It is also one of the latest of our trees to leaf out. So it takes a while in the spring where most trees are already leafed out. This one is one of the last to do that. So that's kind of cool. And then let's move to the blooms. The blooms are really, really pretty. It's a pendulous habit, okay? So, and it can take many, many years, actually, for this plant to actually bloom. Tyler, can you throw up a bloom there?
I do not have a bloom photo. I'm sorry about that, but I've got this one of its just regular habit.
Okay, so there's the habit, and that is a generally good habit. Not not quite as wide as it is tall, but still just a nice, look at that. I mean, just a pretty tree, that you just don't think about very much. But it's got these white, I would call dainty, pendulous blooms that, hang down a little bit from the plant. And, thinking about it and me thinking about them here at work and seeing them, it's like every year is different. So some years you get a really nice bloom set on them and it's just really, really pretty. It's just a white dainty bloom that has a nice little scent to it. But then some years it doesn't bloom all that great. It's kind of funny how these trees do that. And that's a reason why this plant is underused, is because it's not extremely dependable when it comes to its bloom set. But whenever it is in bloom and it's that big, it is really a sight to see and needed to be used more in large areas. So cast a ton of shade. Kentucky Coffetree, that's an underused tree, and you ought to think about it more. And like I said, all of these trees that I'm talking about today, we do sell here. You just don't really think about them, but we do have them. All right, enough with that. Oh, by the way, the Kentucky Coffetree, the champion in the United States, is 90 feet tall by 89 feet wide.
Wow.
That's big.
That's
90 by 90 pretty much. I mean, that's big. And this book, the Durr's Manual, came out a long time ago. So honestly, that tree is probably bigger than that. Now you could probably expect 100 foot out of that tree. So cool plant and worth growing. All right, let's move on to the Yellowwood. And Yellowwood has nothing to do with that old Yellowwood you're thinking about with lumber. That comes from pine trees. Totally different thing. This is just a common name. It's called Yellowwood. Cladrastis is the genus of this plant. Cladrastis kentuckea. All right, it's got pinnately compound leaves. So another one with compound leaves, which, like I said, I'm a sucker for. And look at that. When it's in bloom, I'm telling you, it is a sight to see. Now, I've got to say, this is not a every year dependable full bloomer like this picture you see right here. All right, that's whenever it is absolutely money. I mean, that's what you want. And some years, you certainly get that when it comes to the bloom. So there's those other, this is another one that's got white pendulous blooms. And it's, they look almost like a legume, if you will, the blooms, like pea-shaped blooms. Mm-hmm. And there's a whole bunch of them, and they smell good. So awesome when they're in bloom. But they take a very long time to bloom, okay? So Michael Durr in his manual said that he had started one from seed, and it has been 17 years from seed. He's been growing this plant, okay? It's 20 feet tall. It has never bloomed, not once. 17 years of growth from seed and not a bloom, okay? But what I can tell you is whenever that plant does bloom, it is going to knock your socks off. I mean, it's just fantastic when they do. And that's from seed, y'all. So, I mean, that's obviously tiny little seedlings growing up to a 20-foot tall tree. But it's been 17 years. So it takes a very, very long time for these plants to start to bloom. But when they do, they're great. Not a crazy, crazy tall tree. They're only about 30 to 50 feet tall at maturity. But you can see the width of this plant. The width of this tree that Tyler's got up is probably wider than it is tall. And that's kind of the MO with the Yellowwood. They just are a fat growing tree. But look at all that shade it's throwing. I mean, throwing a lot of shade. It's got a dense, round canopy, okay, and very, very dense. I've got one on the lot, actually, that I looked at just yesterday just to kind of look at it. And it's just got these big, compound leaves that are all very tight. And even in a 20-gallon container, which is about a, 8-foot tree, it's got a very wide spread to it, okay? So if you're really wanting some shade over your deck, and you don't necessarily, some people a lot of times don't really want blooms all that much that are, going to be real dirty over top of, say, a pool or your deck or something that's not going to be a very dirty tree. This could be a good plant for you because, like I said, it's not year after year dependable going to bloom real heavy. So that could be something that throws a lot of shade but doesn't throw a lot of, stuff you have to clean up. So that could be kind of cool for that type of area. It's a medium growth rate, not super fast, but there you go. It's got soft yellow fall color is the way it was described, or the way I describe it. And like I mentioned earlier, here in Middle Tennessee, every year's different when it comes to fall color. So some years it's a little bit better yellow, some years it's a little bit soft, some years it's quick to go yellow and then quick to drop off. So that can happen. But Yellowwood is a cool little tree. I mean, medium-sized tree. You could use this instead of, say, a red or sugar maple. You can see the habit is very similar to both of those, except it's got a compound leaf. And when it does bloom, it's a showstopper. So, like I said, Yellowwood, cool plant. I like it. The champion Yellowwood, 72 feet tall, 73 feet wide. So, like I said, a little bit wider than tall, but very big growing tree, okay? There you go, Yellowwood. All right, let's get into a smaller tree, okay? Let's talk about the Japanese snowbell, Styrax japonicus. Styrax, what a cool name. This plant always comes into us in a pot or container with almost a perfect rounded crown habit, okay? This is somewhat similar to the first tree I talked about, which is Carolina Silverbell. It's got little bell-shaped flowers that just daintily hang from the stems. And they're smaller than the first one, than Carolina Silverbell. Much smaller, but look, very, very similar, white with the yellow reproductive parts. And there's like a million of them, okay? They're small blooms, y'all, yeah, for sure. But there's like a million of them on the tree, okay? I've grown this plant at my house, and I got to say, this is kind of weird, but one of my favorite things about it is whenever it's actually finished blooming and it drops all of its petals. It may have a hard wind that comes through or a rainstorm happens, and all of those petals from the flowers drop and they lay beneath the tree. Since there's so many blooms that it leaves this flower litter below the tree, if you will, and I don't know why, but I find that really attractive to see its leftover spent blooms on the ground below the tree after it's finished up blooming. Now, obviously, I love seeing it when it's in bloom because they're really, really pretty. This is another one that can be a really good substitute for, say, a redbud or a dogwood because they get to be a very similar size, but they keep a really, really, I would say, formal shape. Okay, it's a very just, short, stout stem up to a very rounded canopy plant. It can get 20 to 30 feet tall, 30 being probably its max. I've never identified a 30-footer, but they do exist, and it's got an equal spread. So if it's 20 foot tall, it's going to be about 20 feet wide, and it's just got this perfect habit. It's just super round and very attractive. Can be used close to your home in a landscape setting, and can, deal with some shade as well. Like I talked about earlier, it's okay with a little bit of that afternoon shade or being the understory plant, understory tree to other larger growing trees, throwing some shade. Totally tolerant of that. And this is not a plant that's not going to bloom for you every so, often or whatever. This is a dependable, every single spring, you're going to get a bloom set on this. It's going to be a million little blooms on it. And they're dainty and white and cute. Really like this tree. Like I said, I've grown this at a previous home that I had, and I really, really liked it. It's a really, really pretty plant. And they're fragrant flowers, which is cool. There's the fall color on it. And like I said, around here, not all that great. It's not prized for its fall color. It's really not. It will throw, I've got a little bit of spot. I got a spot in my heart for a little bit of like soft yellow fall colored plants. Okay. It's not vivid. It's not like a ginkgo or something that's just like the best yellow in nature. But it's a soft yellow. It's a yellow, and then it's a drop. It's a we're going into dormancy type of scenario. But you can kind of see the greenish with the yellow in there. Not bad for fall color, but not great as well. But really cool small tree. It's really underused. That one should be used a lot more to replace dogwood.
And weeping varieties are available, right?
There's weeping varieties, a lot of varieties. There's a pink blooming variety. There's weeping variety. Speaking of, there's one called Marley's Pink. Shout out to my daughter who is named Marley. I got to get her one of those trees. We got to find one. Marley's Pink needs to be in my yard. But Styrax should be in everybody's yard, if you ask me. Very tidy, small tree. Easy to grow. Tolerant of a lot of things. Transplants well. Good little tree to grow. Okay, let's move on to number 5. The Littleleaf Linden. Okay, you might have heard of linden trees. You've probably heard of them. This one's the Littleleaf Linden, a very, very interesting flowering plant. Okay, it is very common amongst beekeepers to have littleleaf lindens. Honeybees absolutely love linden trees. Look at all those tiny little blooms. And they smell fantastic. I mean, fantastic. And the bees literally get drunk on their nectar. I mean, they come in and they're all over a linden tree. So like I said, most beekeepers are going to have a linden tree around. Linden trees can get 60 to 70 feet tall. Okay, now that's a very large one. That's like full maturity. That's a good picture of a very large linden tree. You rarely see them that big, okay? In the wild, you might see them that big. In cultivation, they rarely reach that size, okay? They're much more of a single stem to a round canopy lollipop style tree that are getting, for the most part, if you're using them in like urban application, which you can, this is a good tree for, say, like parks that are lined like a concrete path or something. They're very, very formal, actually, I think. Very round canopy, very formal, good-looking tree. And they can be used in that application, generally reaching more that 30 to 40 feet size. Interestingly enough, this was the second tree I ever identified in college when we were doing my my identification class of plants, walking around campus and looking at different trees and identifying them. This was number 2 on my list, the Littleleaf Linden. And what's really interesting about the Littleleaf Linden is the little leaf aspect of it. Okay, so it's got this serrated heart-shaped leaf that's about that big, roughly, the roundness of it. And then below it on the petiole is the stem that from the main stem to the leaf. Right around that area, you've got this little weird leaf that comes out that's about that long, and it sticks out like that. And then underneath that, you've got the blooms that set from another stem up underneath that. So it's an interesting little 3 leaf flower thing going on, where you got the big one, the little weird medium-sized one, and then the bloom below that. So that's already interesting and a talking point. Whenever you actually get up to the tree and you look at it, you're like, never seen that before. I mean, even me, looking at trees all the time, you just don't see that with any other tree. So that's how it gets its name, the Littleleaf Linden. And that's just a very interesting part of the tree, which I find very, very cool. It's only heat hardy to about zone 7, so you could see some of these plants growing down into Georgia a little bit, but that's about as far south as they want to go. They're very cold tolerant. They can live up north much further than where we're at. But like I said, really North Georgia is about the spot they want to stop at. So don't grow them down into Florida. They're not going to do well down there. I read this and I did not know this, but supposedly in Europe, the Littleleaf Linden is used as a hedge a lot of times. So what this means to me is that you can prune. You're going to do your pruning over the wintertime if you ever needed to do any pruning on it to keep it small. But supposedly in Europe, they use this as like hedges. So they'll grow them up to get to a certain size, and then they start topping them and pruning them as needed to be a hedge, and it stays this tight, heart-shaped leafed hedge that blooms like that. And y'all can see, and there's a good picture. There's the dark lustrous leaves that are the big ones in the back, and then you see those light green the little leaf linden, and that's the little leaf that's in that plant, and then the bloom that's very, very small, but like I said, once again, a million billion of them all over the tree. And this is a very dependable bloomer. Every single season, you're going to get good blooms on it. They're actually blooming at our nursery right now, and whenever you walk by them, the smell will just knock you down. So that's why the bees are all over them. Cool plant. Another one that's underused, like all of these trees I'm talking about. But like I said, good one for if you want to line your driveway with some trees and, the old school Bradford pear that everybody used to use. Like this looks like a Bradford pear, except it's way better, way better. And whenever you're driving down your driveway, you open your windows. When these are in bloom, you're going to smell them for sure. So cool plant, little leaf linden. All right, moving on.
Here's a little fall color.
Little fall color? What we got? Yeah, there's that soft yellow to green a little bit. So that's kind of nice too. Yeah, I like that. I like the yellow a little bit the yellow is adorned through all of our woods, and it's just there with a lot of different trees. But whenever you have one single one in the yard and it does something like that, that's always nice to look at. So nice early morning, cool fall coffee looking at that. It's good.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about a different one now. One that I would bet you've probably never heard of. This is the Seven Suns flower, okay? Heptacodium is the genus of this plant. And like I said, you've probably never heard of it, but once again, another cool tree. This is a very small growing tree, and some would even say shrubby tree, if you will. But as they age, they get into that more tree-like look, okay? They have really, really pretty blooms, especially when they get that big. I mean, look at that tree. That's probably 15, 20 foot. And really, they only get about 15 to 20 foot tall. That's about as tall as they get. And their blooms are kind of funny because they'll send these buds out. Like right now on the lot, our Seven Suns flower has buds on them. Those buds will stick tight in that bud like for a while, like a month at least. They just stay tight. They just make you just itch to see those blooms wake up, and it just takes forever. They stay white tight in those buds for a while. But once they open up, they smell really, really good, and they're just pure white and pretty. And when you got a large specimen, it's really, really showy. So another one of the beekeepers' plants, because the bees are really, really all over this plant whenever they're in full bloom. And it's I wouldn't say it's a good substitute for crepe myrtle. Totally different than crepe myrtle altogether. But it's somewhat similar, except a lot slower. Okay, crepe myrtles are pretty fast to grow. Seven Suns flower is not fast to grow. It's a pretty slow growing plant, but it's also very funky. Like there's no two that are alike. Okay, so their branching habit can be, once they get that big, it looks to be a pretty normal-ish tree. But as you watch them grow, and as I've watched them grow, their habit is funky. Like I said, that's the word for me, is funky. It's got stems that are odd. You see just how kind of gnarly-ish that is? It's got that habit about it. That's the reason why to grow. This tree is definitely one of those you would throw in the yard, and as the years gone on and it started to get bigger, people would stop and say, what is that tree? Like, that is interesting. It's very cool. One of the biggest reasons to grow this tree is for its exfoliating bark. Okay, that's very cool. Look at that. It's very peely. It throws, different colors along the stem like that, the tans, the browns, almost orange, if you will, as it ages. And it just makes for a cool little specimen tree. Once again, one that can be used close to your home or in a little small garden bed. What's interesting about this plant, too, is that whenever we receive them at the nursery, we rarely ever see this plant, say, in like a 15 or 20-gallon container, something that's fairly large or has some height on it. It's very rare that we actually get those in. They usually come in as like little 3-gallon what looks like shrubs, okay? And then they do take a while to grow. So you got to be patient with this plant. But as it gets bigger, it really, really is pretty and just funky. I keep coming back to that word because that's what it is. It's a funky grower. And I dig that in trees. I don't have one of these in my yard, but I've been thinking about it for a long time. It's just, it is slow to get there. But certainly cool. I just like it. Durr, in his manual, he said it's got an artistic feel about it. And I think that's a good word as well to describe it. So, Seven Suns flower. You ought to grow it. All right, let's move on. Let's move on to a big grower, okay? One that gets very large and one that has excellent fall color. That is why we grow this. It's called the Chinese Pistache. Look at that. That is in the fall, okay? Once again, it's a compound leaf tree, which is always cool to me. There you go. There is a pretty good picture of what a compound leaf is. It's got that long stem with multiple leaflets that go down that stem. So that's kind of the difference. That's also showing its berries or its seeds, and that is on a female tree, I believe. Yeah, it's a dioicus plant. So dioicus means that there's male and female flowers on separate trees. So if you ever see fruit like this on a Chinese pistache, you know that it's a female tree, okay? Since they are male and female and you don't see this tree a lot, it's fairly rare that you get really good seed production. Unless you have males and females that are planted closely together, you don't typically get this this type of berry set. Now, I will say that both male and female plants flower, and funny enough is that the male plants, their bloom set is a lot tighter, and it looks better than the females do. The females are a little bit more like open and spread out. They're a longer little bloom set. The males are much chunkier, so they kind of give you more show when it's in bloom. But I got to say, this plant's not really grown for its flower production. It's not all that pretty. I'm not gonna lie to you. It's okay. It just looks like a weird cluster on top of the plant before it leaves out, actually, and almost resembling, say, sumac, if you will. If you're familiar with the sumac that blooms atop of its foliage, it's fairly similar to the look of that. But like I said, this plant is grown for its fall color, and it's not a huge tree. It's a medium-sized tree. You could expect 35 to 40 feet tall out of this with a pretty equal spread. You can see in this picture the width is about the same as the height. Very good shade tree. It has 1 million leaves. I mean, 1 million. It's got compound leaves, and they're small, but there's 1 billion of them. I mean, it's so leafy. It's a very good street tree. So like for an urban site, a lot of different cities will use these trees in areas. I actually saw a specimen when I was in Nashville, and it was growing. There you go. There's some of the blooms. So not bad. I mean, oh no, those are probably the berries. Yeah, those are the berries. That'll be later on in the spring. Well, that'll be later on really in summer into fall. But like I said, I saw one in Nashville that was planted in a parking lot. In one of those little areas inside a parking lot just to try to beautify it a little bit at a building. And it was a monster. I mean, that thing was big, like close to full grown, probably at least 30 foot with an equal spread. And it was thriving there. Very good at like air pollution doesn't really bother this plant all that much. It's got hardly any serious pest or pathogen issues. Little bit of leaf spot here or there, maybe. Just because it's got so many leaves, you're going to see some issues maybe on some of the leaves. But for the most part, generally very resistant to a lot of those things. But I saw it when it was in its fall color. My God, y'all. This orange to red. And I looked up at it through where the sun was kind of coming down through it. And it was just I stood there and looked at this tree. I'm not even joking, for probably 2 or 3 minutes, just in awe of it. I mean, I was standing in the shade of it, looking up at its fall color, and I just thought, my God, what a pretty plant. And it really is. It's certainly great for the fall color. It rivals maples with its fall color. I even think it's better just because it has so many more leaves than a maple tree. So if you're into that fall color and you need to throw some shade for a pretty wide growing plant, that's the one to grow. Now, I will say, when you come out to the nursery and you see a young Chinese pistache tree, it's gangly. That's the word, gangly. It's got a stem here, a stem there. It doesn't have this like perfect round canopy at all. It's oddly shaped when it's young. Okay, now, as you saw in those pictures and what I saw in that parking lot in Nashville was a very perfect shade tree. It was perfect. So it grew into a really, really pretty shape. But when it's young, they're odd looking, okay? Funky. They're kind of like pubescent, teenagers a little bit. They're a little odd, a little gangly. But certainly it shouldn't throw you off if you look at a tree that looks like that when it's young. Plant that thing. It's going to grow into something just beautiful, okay? So there you go. Chinese pistache. Really love that tree. Really love that tree. It can tolerate poor soil really, really well. Like, doesn't need anything extra. Buy that tree, throw it in the yard. It's going to live, and it's going to be fine, okay? So, Chinese pistache. There you go. Fall color. You like fall color, get that Chinese pistache in the yard. All right, moving on. I've got 2 left. Here we go. All right. One that is near and dear to my heart. I did a little study on this plant in college, okay? I collected 1,000 seeds. 1,000. And I did different practices of scarification or stratification, if you will, methods on their seed to see how many of them I could get to germinate, okay? It was a whole thing. It was a lot of fun. This is the golden Raintree, okay? Koelreuteria paniculata. Look at that. Okay, let me just ask y'all, how many trees do you see, especially in the summertime, like right now, the golden Raintree is in bloom, like full bloom across town. How many trees do you see that have yellow? The golden Raintree is unrivaled when it comes to yellow blooming plants in the summertime. You just don't see that. I mean, to be quite honest, you don't see very many yellow blooming trees in general. Like, that's just not... Yellow is a very common color in, say, perennials or shrubs, things like that. But for some reason with trees, you don't get just that pure yellow. And when I say yellow, I mean it. That is yellow. It's not like greenish, not like orangish. It's pure yellow. And I love it. It's another plant that's got odd compound leaves. It's just a different shape. You just don't see that shape of leaf very often. But then it's got these almost... I mean, what would you call that? It's just an odd-shaped blooming tree. Okay? It's got very cool bark. All right? You don't even think about the bark all that often. And it's got a cool habit. Another one that whenever you buy it in a container doesn't necessarily have that perfect of a shape. And really, even as this plant grows and gets to be mature and full-sized, its shape is not like perfect, okay? That one kind of is. That's a specimen. I mean, good Lord. That's a pretty tree. And look where it's planted, right around a parking lot, okay? This is where it's commonly used. I noticed that in between the medians of 440 around here in Nashville, they're planted extensively in between the two, interstates, if you will. And they take pollution very, very well. They don't need any extra attention. It's a set it and forget it type of plant. It can take air pollution, like I said, just fine. And it's a summertime yellow bloomer. I keep coming back to this. It's just, you don't get to see yellow like that. And look at the sprays. It's like a spray of yellow. Really, really cool. After it's done with its bloom, when it sets its seed, it's got these seed pods that dangle from it that almost resemble, not almost, they do resemble a habanero pepper. Okay? That's kind of what they look like. They're like in this little husk of a shell, and that's where 2 little tiny seeds will be contained. Think about this. In college, I collected 1,000 of them. It was a big day for me. And then I was able to, get them into seed cells and do different stratification methods and realize that I had literally like 750 out of 1,000 germinate for me. I had 750 golden Raintrees I didn't know what to do with, but the germination was really, really pretty easy on that plant. A pretty fast-growing plant, and once again, somewhat gangly in its youth, I guess is what I would say. But then it works itself out and gets to be a tree like Tyler just showed with that specimen. Man, really, really good. Not all that great for fall color. Around here especially, I've never really seen the fall color be all that good. The leaves tend to just want to drop off a little bit earlier than most, so get ready for that. But over the wintertime, it's got interesting bark, like I said earlier. There you go. Look at those little kind of habanero pepper looking danglies. Those are cool. Yep. And like I said, there's like 2 tiny seeds. I say tiny. They're not super tiny, but little seeds that are inside that pod. Really cool when they do that. Like I said, another underused tree. It just is. Okay. And getting to our last one. Here we go. One of my favorites. Once again, I say the last of my favorites, kind of for the end. And this one is the Chinese Fringe Tree. Here we go. Chionanthus retusus. Look at this plant. Oh my God. I'm a sucker for white. I really like white blooms. I just do. Can't help myself. I love them. They are lacy. Lacy is the word for this, okay? They look like little lacy pillows. From afar, there you go. So that's the lacy bloom, okay? So there's very, very small petals on these blooms, okay? But there's a million billion of them. I've said this many times today already, but there's a ton of those. So they make this little white pillow of lace that you just want to like lay your head on a little bit. You know, they're like little puffs of white, but they're all over it. I have one of these in my yard, and I decided to use it on the very corner of my home. I've got this whole like kind of cottage sweeping bed and outlined with rocks, creek rock actually, that I got from my creek. Brought it up and made this, like I said, this little sweeping kind of perennial bed, if you will, filled with boxwoods and hydrangeas and all these little flowering plants. And then it leads to the corner of the home where I kind of bubbled it out a little bit and made some little extra space from me in the home. And I put that tree right there on the corner. And y'all, this year, it was a showstopper. Showstopper. Now, I got to say, every year is different with the Chinese fringe. It's funny. Some years it decides to be just crazy with its blooms, and then some years it's kind of sporadic, not great. So, like last year, I got a little bit of a bloom set here and there. Wasn't all that great. This year, that thing was loaded and absolutely stunning. Absolutely stunning. Look at that. Oh, it's so good. So, this plant also is male and female. It's a dioicus plant once again. So the females are the only ones that are going to produce the fruit. So if you do have a female, they will produce these little bitty starting green fruits. They're actually drupes, technically. And they end up turning this very blue color by the end of the fall. So that's kind of cool, too. You don't get to see blue fruit all that often unless you're growing blueberries or grapes or something. You don't really see blue all that much, but it is. It's a dark blue drupe. And it's, it contains its seed. I think it contains a single seed. And don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure that it just has one seed. But they're just all over the plant. Mine got pollinated great this year because it's got tons of little fruits on it. And like I said, they'll persist into the fall and turn blue. Not great for fall color, but it's like an off yellow. Once again, most of these are kind of yellowish. It's an off yellow, but it's very, very frost and freeze tolerant. This plant retains its leaves for a very long time into the fall season. Okay, so it's a long time before it decides to drop off. I'm not even lying. I'm pretty sure my tree, it waited until like December to finally shed all of its leaves. So that's kind of cool. You get to keep the leaves for a lot longer than most. And another really interesting part about this plant is its bark. It's got this, I wouldn't call it exfoliating. It's not like the seven sunflower or like a crepe myrtle that really, really peels down and off or anything. It's not like that. It's like, I don't know. It's just something in the bark. It just like peels itself back just a little bit off of the main stem. And like every limb that goes out has that same effect. So it's got like bark that's kind of like, say if my arm's a limb, it's like stripping back just a little bit on each one of the stems. And the stems are very, very rigid and sturdy. But they're one that you got to be careful with them. They don't bend. They just break. So if you're not like a great climbing tree, because they are sturdy, but with enough weight, it'll just snap a limb. I know this because when we unload them here at the nursery, if we're not very careful with those stems coming off the truck, you can break them really, really easily. What is that?
I think that's the fall color.
Fall color. That's not here.
No.
No, I don't know where that picture's taken, but that's some good fall color there. I've never noticed my tree to get that yellow. It's a much duller yellow around here, but that's a good picture. There you go. See what I'm saying? It's like exfoliating, but it stays on. It's almost like it peels back, but persists. That's a really good picture of the stem, and it's just got a really meaty, sturdy stem on it with interesting branching habit. It'll start branching very low. The plant only gets about 15 to 25 feet tall at maturity, so once again, another one that should be used instead of the dogwoods, instead of the red buds. It's a similar size, similar shape, but very interesting. And when it's in bloom, y'all, it is so good. So good.
Now,
All right.
now of those, the Carolina Silverbell is the native, right?
That is native, yes.
And the Yellowwood is also.
Yellowwood's also native. A number of these are, I think, native. Yellowwood certainly is. Kentucky Coffetree.
Yeah, the
is.
Coffetree.
Styrax is native. Littleleaf Linden, I'm not sure if that's native or not, but I think it is. That linden trees are native. I mean, most of these actually are. So, cool. You can find these in the woods every once in a while. You wouldn't know what you found, but they're out there. So, there you go. Okay, y'all. That's my list. That's 9 trees that are underused in our landscape. 9 of which that we sell here at Bates Nursery every single year. We have them all the time. Now, do know we are in the dead of the summer. Well, not really. We're kind of just getting into summer. But we don't buy a lot of large trees or even bring in a whole bunch of more trees in the dead of the summer. Large trees need a lot of water. So it's going to be in the fall before we really re-up on our trees again. But we will. And we will certainly carry every one of these trees. And they should be used more. I really think so.
Question on the Bates Facebook page. If I plant your last favorite, which I believe is the Chinese fringe tree,
Chinese fringe,
how long will it take to see what you are showing?
Like I said, every year is a little different. Even mine, that's a pretty mature tree. Mine's probably approaching 8 to 9 feet tall, with probably about a 7-foot spread. It's a pretty girthy little tree right now. Even mine, this was the best year that I've ever seen it. Now, I planted it 3 seasons ago. And like I said, this has been the best year for my blooms, and this year it was loaded. And I even, like I said, I quote Durr in his manual. I read the exact same thing. I said the same thing that he said that I've observed with my tree, is that some years are better. And I don't necessarily have a great answer for that, why that is, but some years the bloom is better. But you could expect blooms. You could plant it this year and expect blooms next spring. You really could. It could, it probably will happen, at least some sporadic blooms. But like I said, I don't have a definite answer for that because every year is a little bit different with the Chinese fringe tree. But my God, I love it. Their branching habit, so cool, so unique, and just different. So there's that. But anyway,
if you have any other questions, now's the time.
It is the time.
Otherwise, this webinar will be archived later, and you can go back and watch it again and again on our YouTube page.
I know. I threw a lot of info out there, okay, in a very short amount of time. There's, write down a couple of these trees and do your own research and look them up and see pictures and, areas where they could be used. They're just trees that get forgotten. People don't know about them. So I decided to tell you about them. And I love trees so much.
Is the Littleleaf Linden the same as the Basswood, or is it a cousin?
It is cousin. Yeah, you could say that. It's a different species, and we do sell the basswood as well. Had a beekeeper come in just yesterday to buy the American basswood, and that is Tilia americana. So it's a different species. I went with the Littleleaf Linden because I find it a little bit more ornamentally attractive. The American basswood is, like I said, Tilia americana, and it's a true native that lives in our woods around here. It gets very big, bigger leaf than the Littleleaf Linden, but a very similar bloom. Almost exactly the same type of bloom, actually. But it's a bigger growing tree. And like I said, not as ornamentally friendly. We do sell it. And like I said, it's mainly for the beekeepers out there that we love to help out. And definitely, it's another tree that's in our woods that you can actually go out in the woods and find it pretty quickly. It's a pretty common one. But yeah, it's a cousin of the Littleleaf.
And basswood honey is delicious.
That's what I'm saying. Beekeepers love it. The bees love it.
All right. I'm not seeing any other questions, Austin.
All right, guys. Well, appreciate y'all watching. Plant these trees. They're great. You just don't know about them. Plant them. Your neighbor is going to come over and be like, what is that? Anyway. All right. Love talking about trees. Everybody have a great day, and we will see you soon.